Hi, I'm Robert, and because the raspberry season is getting closer and closer, I thought we can make a raspberry cake with a delicious, moist chocolate sponge, a light raspberry mousse, and added extra fresh raspberries, a very good and fresh cake. As usual, the first step is the sponge, one of my favorite sponges, very moist and chocolatey sponge. Easy, 100 grams of 55% dark chocolate, on top of which I poured 60 grams of coffee. I used 2 espresso shots, and I'll mix until the chocolate melts and it turns into a ganache. In a second bowl, the rest of the wet ingredients, 2 eggs, 125 grams of buttermilk, or you can use kefir or a light yogurt. In any case, more liquid fermented dairy, let's say, 100 grams of oil, and 150 grams of sugar that I homogenize. And on top, I will pour the chocolate and coffee ganache. In another bowl, the dry ingredients, 150 grams of flour, 50 grams cocoa, 4 grams of baking powder and a pinch of salt, and I simply combine them and I mix using a spatula just until combined. And just like that, the sponge is done. I put it in a 18 centimeter ring and I'll bake it at a fairly low temperature, being a very dense sponge, so about 150 Celsius for about 50 minutes, maybe more, depending on your oven, of course. But you can do the toothpick test just to be safe. The sponge has cooled and I cut it in 3 slices, removing a very thin layer from the top. And now we start with the raspberry mousse. And so I put in a pot 215 grams of raspberry puree and 75 grams of sugar, and I heated them until the sugar melted. Separately, in a smaller bowl, 7.5 grams of gelatin and about 38 grams of cold water, so 5 times the gelatin, and I let the gelatin hydrate well. And now, well, you can either melt the gelatin on a double boiler, but for me, since the puree is still hot, I'll put the gelatin straight in and the heat will melt it. In a bowl, I put 75 grams of mascarpone that I'll soften a bit, and I'll start adding the raspberry puree little by little so I don't get clumps of mascarpone in my mousse. And at the end, I'll add 225 grams of cream that I have whipped, and I'll add it into 3 parts. And I got this super fluffy mousse that I'll use to fill the cake, using about 330 grams of mousse on each layer and about 75 grams of fresh raspberries, the same on each layer. Here you can add more raspberries or less, as you prefer. You already know the story. Cover with cling film and let it sit in the fridge for at least 6 hours or overnight, and we'll be back with the decoration. We got to the decoration, and for the frosting, I put in a bowl 250 grams of mascarpone, 150 grams of cream, 30 grams of powdered sugar, a bit of vanilla, and a little bit of red or pink coloring, trying to match the color of the outside frosting to the inside mousse, so when we slice the cake it looks good. And I'll simply mix with a whisk until the cream stabilizes. And using this cream I'll frost the cake, like I always do, starting with the top, then the sides, then leveling the top. On top of the cake, I'll pour a simple chocolate ganache, made using dark chocolate and cream in equal parts. I used 100 grams of each and melted them on a double boiler. And for the decoration I'll use raspberries, of course, since we have raspberries in the cake, and white elements because I think it matches the cake and looks very good. And a little red velvet sponge that I dried and crumbled. This was the chocolate and raspberry cake recipe. Thanks for watching until the end. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.